I think everybody owes the Justice for January 6th folks, the folks from Look Ahead America, Matt Braynard and his ilk, a big apology, because everybody from Donald Trump to Roger Stone to Glenn Beck to I saw a bunch of MAGA influencers on Twitter encouraging people not to go to this event because it's a setup by the FBI. They're going to round everybody up and throw you in prison. I think Roger Stone called it agitprop. He said, oh my gosh, it's going to be all feds. Anybody who goes to this, you're an idiot. You deserve to go to jail because you're so dumb, because this is so obvious, and you're a terrible person if you go. Which was just, to me, seemed so strange on its face. There was just all of a sudden, universally across the board, from left and right, from your typical legacy media folks and your MAGA influencers, including Trump himself, all at once came out and said, hey, don't go to this one specific event in Washington, D.C., when there's lots of events that occur across this country. Every weekend, people get together and give speeches and talk to each other. It's a pretty common thing in a country where you have freedom of speech. But for some reason, everyone wanted to shut down this one event. And, the feds, they really put on a great show. They marched in the troops to intimidate them. They had guys with full body armor and rifles marching around. A lot more soldiers there than there were protesters. And frankly, amongst the crowd of so-called protesters, a good chunk of them were obviously undercover agents. One, was totally confirmed because the Capitol Police, who looked like soldiers, they were, decked out in their full combat gear, roughed this guy up and said, hey, he's got a gun, stop him. And he said, wait, I'm a cop. Of course he was. They were so happy. They said, oh, we finally got one. We found somebody who came to, the capital of the United States, the country that's home of the Second Amendment, carrying a gun. This must be our one guy that we can exploit and say, look at all these insurrectionists gathering in the Capitol. And then, oh, wait, he was a cop. But the core group, the core audience of Real People seemed to be about the same as it has been for the past, rallies that Matt Braynard's group has held. This is not their first one. They've done it 2 before at different places. They did one at the DOJ. They did one at where was it? Oh, at the prison that the January 6th folks are being held at. And I have to thank Ford Fischer. He's one of the few legitimate journalists in this country, and he pointed that out. Because he goes to all around to these sorts of events for everybody and covers he covers live events like this. And he pointed out it's quite strange that there's all of a sudden all this media attention about this event when this same group has held events in the past. And, and folks are like celebrating and dunking on them and going, ha, 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 look at how few people showed up. You're all a bunch of losers. And it's like, do you put it into context? They've never had an event where they've had 100 people show up. It's always been in the tens. Like 70 people, I think, was their best turnout. This is a very small group. These are not influential people. But they have a cause, which I think is a pretty good cause. I think a lot of people on the right would agree that, they're standing up for a good cause. And just because there aren't that many of them, that's not a reason to dunk on them. If you agree that their cause is just, you're kind of dunking on yourself for not showing up. And I can include myself in that. Because I didn't show up, but I don't go to these kinds of events. I'm not going to, and obviously I live far away from Washington, D.C. anyway, so it would have to be a pretty big event if it were going to attract me. But then again, I don't like the atmosphere of protesting. It's just not something that I get into. But some folks do, and most of those folks are on the left. I think it's nice to see that there's someone on the right, like Matt Braynard, who specifically is trying to say, hey, you know what? I want to be a community organizer like Obama was, because you know who was effective at doing that sort of stuff? The left is, and they get a lot done that way. And so the fact that, he's starting out very small and has a small group of people who are showing up to these events, you should be encouraging this kind of stuff, because who else is doing it? And, the fact that the feds decided to show up and swarm these people at random, seemingly, they didn't show up and swarm their last 2 events, that's not their fault either. So it's just, I think it's very sad. I I don't know how I would feel if I were in Matt's position or one of these other people, but I mean, it's just the, well, I mean, he said during the event that they had speakers who pulled out because of pressure from their friends and family saying, oh my gosh, you can't go. Trump says that this is a setup. You're going to get thrown in jail. And these were family members of, the people who were being held prisoner after January 6th. These were, I think in one case, it was the mother of the QAnon shaman guy. Remember him? Well, she was intimidated enough by all this to where she didn't want to show up because she doesn't want to end up in prison like her son. That guy who walked around, with that buffalo hat on or whatever it is, he's going to spend 8 months in prison or in jail, I guess it is technically when it's less than a year. So, I'm kind of torn on this. On the one hand, if I were an event organizer like this, and I was organizing, what were very small events, I might be thrilled that I'm getting this much attention. Because their past two events, unless you're really, really plugged into this kind of stuff like I am, you wouldn't have heard of it. You probably haven't heard of Look Ahead America, before this week. And even if, it's 80, 90, 95% bad press, there's going to be some percentage of people who see that coverage and say, hey, I should look into these people and see who they are. And then if they look into them and they say, hey, you know what, this seems like a pretty good group of people, well, then they're going to grow their supporters. I mean, their whole purpose here is to try and make noise and raise awareness about their cause, about these folks who are being held prisoner and being, treated poorly and being denied access to their attorneys and held in solitary confinement and all these things that are not nice. And so even if they have the vast majority of, MAGA influencers against them, they got a lot of eyeballs this weekend. There were a lot of people probably watching the stream like I was, waiting to see, hey, is this vaunted insurrection going to happen or not? Now, I knew it wasn't going to happen, but I wanted to see, hey, is there going to be some kind of false flag thing? Is the FBI going to detonate a bomb and blame it on, Trump supporters? And the answer, thankfully, was no. I don't know what exactly the feds were doing because, they didn't carry out a false flag. So I'm not sure what. I don't know if the feds, because every cop there is a fed. You have Capitol Police, you've got DC Metropolitan Police, and you've got undercover FBI guys. And there was one funny photo going around of a bunch of guys, with the sides of their heads shaved, and they were all wearing like chubbies, and not polo shirts, but like tightly fitted T-shirts that you could tell cost like $40 a piece. And, some people were passing that, a picture around and going, hey, the feds aren't even hiding themselves. They totally stood out in the crowd. The rest of it was, a bunch of, slovenly boomer-com types. But maybe the feds bought into their own BS and the media's BS and actually thought that this could be a dangerous event, even though these people have held two events previously and, nothing bad has happened. They just have made their speeches and gone home. And so maybe they really thought, hey, we need all this here. Or either they were duped by the media or they were trying to intimidate these people, which, I think is probably as fair of a guess as any at this point. And I applaud people for not being intimidated. Frankly, if I were the organizer of this event, after all the bad press, I probably would have canceled it. Which is why I don't do public stuff. There's a reason I don't take that kind of pressure well. It's just not something that I enjoy and that I relish. My instincts have always, told me to kind of lay low, keep your head down, wait for a good opportunity. But when you've got a lot of heat coming at you, and and you're a real tiny fish in a real big pond, the instincts are to go and hide under some, I don't know, not seaweed, whatever the freshwater equivalent of seaweed would be. Hide under a rock or something, wait for the big fish to pass. So, yeah, I think that as far as their critics go, this is going to be a lose-lose event, because either something bad happened and all of the the media said, "See, I told you so. This is a white supremacist uprising," and all the MAGA influencers would go, "See, I told you so. It was a false flag. All of you who went there are dumb, and so therefore you deserve to rot in jail, and so we'll have more political prisoners, and there will be no one on the right standing up for them because the right will say, well, you're dumb, so you deserve to go to the gulag." And if nothing happened like it did now, they would just go, ha ha ha. Not enough people showed up to your event. There was no real number that anyone was throwing out in which it would have been considered a success, no matter how many people showed up. This would have been considered a failure by the critics because they would have said, oh, it's too small, even though all of their events have been small. Like I said, it's a very small group. These are not big influential people. As Trump and Roger Stone both said, hey, nobody important is showing up at this. I've never heard of any of these people. I don't know them. Now, they're not friends of mine, and so they don't deserve to speak. You're not allowed to give a speech in a public park unless you have Roger Stone's approval, apparently. I guess that was an added clause to the First Amendment that you're not always taught in school. It's right there next to the good and plenty clause, I think. Maybe these folks just should have shown up at Roger Stone's house off of Las Olas and knocked on his door and asked for permission to speak in a public park. Maybe then, once Roger Stone had met you, because Roger Stone didn't know anybody, the folks that were showing up at this, nobody important, maybe he would have considered you important enough to go give a little speech in a public park. And by the way, I did not just dox Roger Stone. He doxed himself a couple days ago, in case any of you saw that. His address is now publicly known, though I did not give the specific street. There's a lot of houses off of Las Olas. But hey, maybe that's why he decided to post his address online. Maybe he did that hoping that people would come by and ask him for permission every time that they want to give a speech in a public park. And then maybe, if you kiss his ring and get his blessing, he won't call you a Fed. So I would say yesterday was a success for that event, for what they wanted to achieve. They got more attention than they ever have for any of their past events. And because you can't really prove who was a Fed and who wasn't at that event, they can claim, hey, this was our biggest turnout ever. Because they'd never had a group of over 100 people. And yesterday, by the accounts I've heard, it was over 100 people. Which is not a lot of people, but again, this was not meant to be a big event. These have not been big events in the past. These are people, who have a common goal, common interest, and a very narrow set of goals, getting together to talk to each other, which is a very normal and American thing. Talking to a group of people in a park should not be a big deal. In a healthy society, that happens all the time in parks, in every city, without there being a big fuss about it. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.